Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and today, getting scientific. I've got three stories here of people who were kind of bad at being science. They were like, I understand science. This, whatever we're going to do is totally going to work. And then it didn't work because it turns out they didn't actually understand science. And so we're looking at the stories of David Hahn, Thomas Jagger, and our first story will be of the now abandoned town of Times Beach, Missouri. Story time. Times Beach used to be a small town a few miles southwest of St. Louis, Missouri. And I say used to because it no longer exists, really at all, thanks to the ineptitude of the United States government and just a general lack of environmental awareness and bad science, obviously. What was once a town of about 2,000 people is now basically a commemorative park that you probably don't actually want to visit because it's just not safe. Times Beach, honestly, just wasn't even a great place to begin with. And like, probably you could have figured that out. Like any town with the word beach in it, that's not actually on the coast of either the Pacific or the Atlantic or the Gulf, I guess. It's probably not great. It was founded in 1925, after the St. Louis Star-Times newspaper ran a promotion selling 20 by 100 foot lots and a 6-month newspaper subscription in basically what was a floodplain near the Merrimack River for $67.50, which is wild. There's so many crazy things going on in that one sentence, right? Like, first of all, why is a newspaper selling real estate? It just shows you how much power in newspapers used to have, because they could just be in real estate too. And you get a free 6-month newspaper subscription. Just go buy one of these lots in a floodplain. And it was like, for what it's worth, like it wasn't even on the Mississippi. It was on a tributary of the Mississippi, which doesn't make it any better because those rivers still flood too. And also, God, $67.50 used to buy you a tract of land that you could put a house on. Oh, USA. Anyway, although many of St. Louis's wealthy population actually used Times Beach as a summer home spot, the Depression hit a few years later and basically turned the town into a low-income bedroom community for poor people who then had to commute into the city. To make things worse, obviously the Merrimack River kept flooding the town, which then forced everyone, when they rebuilt, to build their homes on stilts. And then, even more, because it was a low-income town now, there wasn't a lot of tax money going around for public improvement in the area, because if you didn't know, like, that's how the tax system works. It's not that like it all gets redistributed evenly. Like whatever the income is in your district, the taxes that get collected there just go right back into that district. That's why you have these affluent areas. It's not because just a group of rich people chose to live over there. They also then reap those benefits of the taxes that they paid because it comes right back into there. So it improves the streets and roadways. It improves, what businesses show up there and just kind of the overall aesthetic, and it looks nicer. That's why some schools, depending on where the district is, some schools have all the new technology. They've got a bunch of extra classes and curriculums. They got a super nice building. And then there's, that other school that's like real crappy, right? Because it's in another district. It's a lower income district. So that's where the disparity really shows up. And it's something, and maybe you knew this. It's something I didn't realize until like I was in my 20s, where it's like, everyone's paying these taxes, but not everyone is necessarily benefiting equally from them. And so if you want to benefit more from those taxes, you need to go live in an area where, people are more or less paying more taxes, or, a higher percentage of taxes, or whatever the case is, or, maybe there's just more people living there, so there's more tax money being generated there, whatever it is. That part I still haven't quite figured out yet. But yeah, so, Times Beach was initially going to be a really nice area, but then the Depression came and wiped it all out, and now all the poor people live there, and there wasn't a ton of tax money being generated to keep the area looking good. So the people living in this area, they suffered with this for like the next 40 years, just tons of dust, tons of potholes in the road, and they just constantly complained to the Times Beach city government to have some solution to fix these problems. So the city of Times Beach contracted a guy named Russell Bliss to come and fix this problem. Now, Bliss was not just some random guy they found. Bliss was kind of like a local hero among the farmers in the area, because he had figured out a way to take chemical waste and use it to control all the dust from the dirt roads. And dirt roads were a huge problem, apparently, in the St. Louis area. Because if you remember back, a couple hundred episodes ago, when we did the episode on sports and covered the 1903 St. Louis Olympics marathon, that was one of the things, because the marathon course was mostly on dirt roads, and the dust that the racers up front were kicking up were causing breathing problems for the racers in the back. And so the dust, still a problem in Missouri, in greater St. Louis. But Russell Bliss, he had basically taken this chemical waste and he put a couple of other ingredients in it to make it maybe a little less toxic. And then he would spread it along these dirt roads, and it would basically harden or put this kind of sheen and protective layer over the dirt road so that less dust would come up. And the farmers loved this, because now, I don't know, there wasn't a lot of dust flying around. Things were maybe a little bit cleaner. It wasn't gross. So Russell Bliss was first paid $150 to spray an indoor horse arena in the town of Moscow Mills. A few days after Bliss had sprayed over 2,000 gallons of waste oil on the area, though, birds began just dropping dead. Horses began developing sores and lost their hair. And within a few months of him spraying this indoor horse arena, 62 horses had died. And apparently that was fine. Like, all the farmers were like, well, kind of sad about our horses dying, but God, man, at least I can see all the dead carcasses littered across the pastures. Instead, a couple weeks ago, you couldn't see anything. It's just all dust kicked up from the wagons and the cars driving by. Couldn't see anything. Now you can see for miles. And sure, you can see dead horse carcasses for miles, but at least we can see. And so everyone was kind of cool with it. The next month, Bliss was hired to spray another arena in Jefferson City. 12 horses died there. Another similar situation occurred at a stable near St. Louis, but none of that mattered to the town leaders of Times Beach, because they wanted the dust fixed, and, Bliss's magic chemical gunk had fixed the roads. It had not only taken care of the dust, but it had also basically filled in the potholes, and it was cheap. It was a great solution. Most everybody wins, except horses, clearly. So in 1972, because, like I said, they've been suffering with this for 40 years. So 1972, Bliss, he's already, massacred a ton of horses in the surrounding areas, but all the dust was gone. So Times Beach paid Bliss $2,400 to spray 160 gallons of basically toxic waste on 23 miles of dirt roads around Times Beach. And guess what? Over the next 4 years, the number of people dying from things like cancer and liver failure went from 0 to basically Jesus Christ, that's a lot of dead people. And that raised some red flags. So the EPA came in to investigate, and they found insanely high levels of dioxin, which is the same chemical that was used in the manufacturing of Agent Orange, which was the really bad thing that maybe the United States used in Vietnam that we don't really like to talk about. So, Bliss is just basically biologically warfare, use biological warfare on these dirt roads because, God forbid, there's dust. So, after analyzing the soil, and seeing how much dioxin was in the soil, the government concluded that the contamination was so bad that the entire town of Times Beach was no longer habitable. All right. When the Merrimack River flooded once again in 1982, the government just went back in and paid the remaining residents to leave. The town was disincorporated in 1985, and it's basically nothing today. So don't spread toxic waste, even if you find a seemingly good use for it. It's bad. Okay. Our second story here, kind of a shorter one. In 1935, Mauna Loa on Hawaii's Big Island erupted and threatened to destroy the town of Hilo. Although, look, volcanoes in Hawaii erupt all the time, and residents are used to coexisting with molten lava. It happens almost every year, if not every year. Sometimes it's a really big story because there's nothing else that news outlets have going on to keep your attention. Like, I know a couple of years ago, the volcano erupted and it was just 24-hour news for like a week as lava crept down roads. And sure, it got into some residential areas and that was bad, but it happens quite often. And Hawaii, it's just part of living in Hawaii. You take the good with the bad. But in 1935, volcanologist Thomas Jagger decided that he'd had enough of this. All right, Hawaii, you're great, but your volcanoes suck, and we got to put an end to this. And he wanted to put an end to volcanoes like Mauna Loa threatening people forever. So Jagger went to the nearby Army Corps base and recruited George S. Patton, that one, to help him out. Jagger believed that the final solution, which is crazy language to use in the 1930s, the final solution to prevent volcanoes from disrupting lives ever again was to bomb the volcano. Just drop a bunch of bombs on it. And in the 1930s in America, like that was like becoming a real popular solution for things. Like, oh man, we got all these bombs. Bombs are pretty effective. They stop a lot of things. Let's throw them on volcanoes and see if that'll stop the volcanoes. Jagger believed that the explosions from the detonating bombs would cause the channels and underground tubes that transported the lava to the surface to collapse, thus preventing further lava flows from erupting and destroying the island. Like, it's not the worst logic, all right? Like, never mind that dropping a bomb on an erupting volcano, or even at the top or surface of a volcano where there is already active lava coming out, is too late, right? Like, if you're going to bomb a volcano to collapse the lava tubes, you need to do it when the volcano is not actively erupting so that the bomb doesn't have to go through feet of molten lava and melt and have, absorb the explosive detonation. Also, I don't know if you know how volcanoes work or not, but even if the lava tubes and flows got destroyed, all right, do you know how powerful volcanoes are? Like, the volcano will just create new ones on the next eruption. So, like, great logic if you don't understand how volcanoes work. Pretty stupid now that you do know how volcanoes work. I'm just assuming you out there were not really, fully aware of the intricate nature of the plumbing behind volcanoes, but now you do, because this is an educational program. George S. Patton, who saw no other logical alternative, sent 10 cloth-winged biplane bombers out from the airbase in Hawaii with 2 600-pound demolition bombs each to bomb the volcano. So basically, he sent 20 600-pound bombs out to bomb Mauna Loa. Of the 20 bombs that the planes dropped on the volcano, because they actually did this, 5 landed directly into the flow of lava, creating massive craters that just quickly filled with more lava. One of the explosions sent lava shooting 200 feet into the air, ripping several holes in one of the plane's wings. How that plane didn't crash, I don't know. A week later, the lava flows actually stopped, and Jagger took all of the credit. Not assuming that just the volcano had finished erupting for that cycle, but whatever. Legitimate scientists never believed that Jagger's plan actually worked. Obviously, Mauna Loa kept erupting later on. And yeah, it was just real dumb. Our last story here is of David Hahn, who was a Boy Scout who just really, really loved science. All right. So unlike most Boy Scouts who spent their time out in the woods doing outdoorsy things like collecting merit badges for tying knots or collecting bugs or whatever they do, I was never a Boy Scout. I don't know what you guys do. Hahn was over conducting all sorts of chemical experiments that often resulted in small and pretty harmless explosions, but explosions nonetheless. However, he actually received the Atomic Energy Merit Badge, which I didn't know was a thing in the Boy Scouts. Apparently it is. But he wanted to go bigger. I don't know what's beyond the Atomic Energy Merit Badge, but maybe there was another one. So in 1994, he basically became the inspiration for Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory when he decided to build a tiny nuclear reactor in a shed in his backyard. And so he basically wanted to build what was known as a breeder reactor, which is this type of nuclear reactor that generates more fissile material. In other words, fissile material meaning materials that sustain a nuclear fission reaction like uranium or thorium, but basically, generates more of this material than it consumes. And basically, in the nuclear world, there's fission and fusion reaction. All of these giant nuclear power plants that you see, they use fission reaction. And essentially that is why it generates this nuclear waste that's got to be stored in these barrels and, buried thousands of feet below the surface because it's very contaminant and very radioactive. Nuclear fusion, which we're still I think almost starting to figure out, much cleaner, I think, much better, because it's basically the opposite, right? This is so far beyond my level of understanding. But basically, in nuclear fission, right, these radioactive elements like uranium or thorium or whatever, they're split. And that means more of them are created. And so it obviously generates a lot more waste. Whereas in fusion, the atoms are brought together, which then releases the energy, and obviously then there's less waste, as far as I can understand. If there is a nuclear physicist out there listening, tell me I'm wrong, and tell me in the dumbest terms possible. All right, explain it in Fortnite terms, bro. Tell me the simplest way to explain that. I feel like I got it kind of close. Anyway, you get it. It's whatever. Dude, this kid is building a nuclear reactor in his shed. That's the whole point of this whole story. All right, forget the other stuff I said. So he began stockpiling all kinds of radioactive materials, such as americium from smoke detectors, radium from clocks, thorium from lanterns, and tritium from gun sights. And it's crazy how much radioactive materials are just out there that you can buy. Now, we've talked about this before. In the, I think it was the Terrible Terrorist episode, there was a terrorist who basically was going to build a radioactive bomb, and he stockpiled a bunch of americium from smoke detectors. The problem was that you would need just a massive warehouse level of smoke detectors to even come close to having a toxic amount of americium. But whatever. This kid's stockpiling any kind of radioactive material he could find. And so with his materials, he built his reactor out of a block of lead. He then spent $1,000 on batteries and used the lithium in there to purify the thorium ash inside the reactor. Shockingly, I don't know, but apparently that works. All right. Whatever I just said is how you create a small nuclear reaction in your backyard. Get a bunch of thorium from camping lanterns, I guess. Go get you a Coleman lantern from the camping store, get the thorium out of it, and then put it on a lead block, and then get some batteries and take the lithium out of the batteries, and then, I don't know, wave it over the lead block or something. I don't know what he did. And maybe he said hocus pocus or something, and boom. And he's doing this. He is producing fissionable materials from his tiny shed in his backyard. Now, this is a great accomplishment. All right. This is a little teenager, little Sheldon Cooper over here. He is creating nuclear power in his backyard, but that success did not last very long. On the way home from another outing to gather more radioactive material, Hahn was stopped by police on just an unrelated issue. I don't know. Maybe he didn't signal on his bike or something or whatever, ran a stop sign or something. I don't know. But when the officer approached the car, he was in a car. The officer was immediately alarmed by the amount of odd items in the car because his car is stuffed with, like I said, smoke detectors, lanterns, gun sights, not even guns, but just like scopes. And it's just weird. So the officer's naturally very curious. Hahn, before the officer could even start, Hahn warns the officer that pretty much everything in the car had radioactive materials in it. And to the police's credit, they took him seriously, which is not what they normally do to a white teenager. And you can see all of the school shootings for that evidence. I'm getting controversial now. I don't know why I'm doing this. It's so stupid. But over the course of the next several days, the police actually got the FBI and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to come investigate. They showed up to this kid's property and investigated his reactor. And officials, when they investigated this, they not only realized that Hahn's reactor was working, but it was producing 1,000 times the amount of radiation that anyone should be exposed to. So this kid, I mean, it's impressive what he's doing, but it's so pointless. On June 26, 1995, the EPA actually designated the entire property, the shed, the house, everything on it, as a hazardous materials cleanup site. They destroyed the shed and actually took the reactor and all of the materials that Hahn had created and buried them out in Utah. After this incident, because, police were like, gosh, real impressive. And you didn't technically break any laws, but God, you can't do that. We got to take this away. All right, go channel that passion somewhere else. But he didn't. He got really depressed. It also didn't help that his girlfriend broke up with him and his mom committed suicide over the next year, which is wild. It's crazy that like his mom committing suicide is just like a side note in this story. And I don't know why she did it. Maybe because look, here's the thing. If my kid, all right, if Finn grows up to be super into science and he goes to our backyard in the barn that we have and builds a nuclear reactor and ends up having our property torn down by the government and declared a hazardous waste zone, I'm not mad. I'm impressed. All right. As long as I'm not going to jail over it. All right. If I'm going to jail over it, I'm real pissed off. All right. Because how am I supposed to know that that's illegal? But I'm not mad about it. I'm not suicidal over it. I'm impressed. If anything, if I was suicidal going into it, I'm cured now. Because, that's impressive. I want to see what else this kid does. And so, I don't know. Lots of factors going into it. But his mom commits suicide. His girlfriend breaks up with him. On the bright side, though, Hahn did achieve the rank of Eagle Scout, which, I don't know, it probably wasn't that important to him at that point. He eventually enlisted in the Navy, where he spent 4 years serving before joining the Marines. And then a few years after that, he was honorably discharged for medical reasons and returned to Michigan. Guess what he did after returning to Michigan? On August 1st, 2007, he was arrested after he removed several smoke detectors from the halls of his apartment building because he was going to harvest the americium from them to build another nuclear reactor. Like, you got to learn your lesson from the first time, right? Like, you can't do it again. Like, you know how to do it. Fine. Go get a job at like a university or somewhere where they're working on this stuff and go play in that laboratory. Stop trying to make your own. He was ultimately given a delayed sentence on the condition that he undergoes psychiatric treatment. But then on September 27th, 2016, at 39 years old, Hahn died from, the official cause was alcohol poisoning, though the EPA truly believed that Hahn's life expectancy had already greatly been reduced after spending absurd amounts of time crammed into that tiny shed as a kid, surrounded by highly radioactive materials with like little to no safety measures in place. Like, he might have had like a mask on, like a welder's mask, maybe, but like he was still like almost fully exposed to all of the radiation that he was playing. So, random dude just building nuclear reactors and then died of alcohol poisoning and kept trying to keep building them. So that's that story. There you go. Bad scientist in the books. I don't know. I couldn't figure out how to end that. I couldn't figure out how to end those stories there. Anyway, let's recap. You know what we're doing. We're recapping and seeing what we learned today.
What did we learn?
Number one, don't take your toxic waste and spray it over dirt roads because it gets rid of the dust. Just deal with the dust. You know, is it worth having 100 horses die so that it's not dusty? Get over it. Number two, you can't stop a volcano by bombing it. All right. You can't really stop anything by bombing it. We tried to stop the Japanese and they're still around. So, I mean, we stopped them from like, you know, continuing the war, I guess. So that kind of accomplished it. But like, you can't permanently stop something by bombing it to death. It'll just come back. And then number three, you can't build a nuclear reactor in your backyard. That's real dumb and very dangerous for everybody involved. Next week on Our Weird World, we got scientific this week, so we're going gangster next week. We got 4 stories of just dudes and gangs and some stuff that they did. We're looking at the stories of Charlie Berger, Giuseppe Greco, Abel Rahim Mansour, and Murder Inc. There was just a whole gang named Murder Incorporated, and you're going to learn about them next week. So that's it. Thank you so much for continuing to listen. Keep telling all your friends and keep it weird.